So welcome. We are going to be having a panel presentation called Stewardship, Perspectives from the Field. And we have 4 speakers this afternoon. Tracy Bond has been working in environmental, economic, and community development for over 30 years. And she's worked in the public, private, and voluntary sector in different capacities, but always has the vision of bettering our communities. And she's a real passionate speaker for stewardship, so we really look forward to her contribution this afternoon. Tracy will be followed by Wayne Salewski, and he's currently the chair of the Nechako Environment and Watershed Stewardship Society. He retired from the BC Ministry of Forests and Wildland Fire Service. He's currently the chair of the Nechako White Sturgeon Recovery Initiative Community Working Group. Wayne is working with farms, ranches, and government agencies towards the recovery of streams, rivers, and the watershed. Following Will, we will have Phil. Phil Osborne is a senior coastal geomorphologist with WSP Golder, and he leads national and global coastal and marine maritime practice from a base in Vancouver. He's a registered professional geoscientist in BC, Ontario, Nunavut, and the Northwest Territories. Phil specializes in coastal dynamics, oceanography, and geomorphology, and has 35 years of international experience in scientific research and consulting. Finally, we have Clarissa Huffman. She's a registered professional planner, and she's a climate risk analyst and project management with Morrison Hershfield. She specializes in climate-informed community planning and has experience with low carbon resilience, nature-based solutions, and climate risks and vulnerability assessments. In addition to be a board member at SCBC, she's also co-chair of the Planning Institute of BC Climate Action Subcommittee and a board member of Starfish Canada. So without further ado, we have a star-packed panel this afternoon. We will have, each speaker will have about 6 minutes, and then we'll have time for some Q&A after. So if you can hold your questions to the end and just type them into the chat, we will monitor those and circle to the questions after everybody's given a presentation. So thanks, and let's turn it over to Tracy.
Great. Thanks very much, DG. And great, let's talk stewardship. So I'm just wanted to, so a lot of the perspectives, just in putting this together, just wanted to tell you sort of where a lot of the stuff comes from. I talked with our Baker Creek Enhancement Society directors, some of our partners, and the people that we've been working with, some ex-staff, and to just sort of talk about this perspective, because this is something where all of us are quite passionate about. And so our long-term director, oh, sorry, the screen just keeps changing. Okay. And the, yeah, so our long-term members, some of our partners, and Baker Creek's been doing environmental education, stewardship, and restoration of watersheds for 29 years now. And some of our directors are actually the ones that actually started our organization. So they've got a wealth of knowledge that I rely on all of the time. So here are some of our perspectives that we've got. In talking about stewardship, I thought I just kind of wanted to talk about what it is that we consider stewardship. And a definition of environmental stewardship that I really like is active caring. And that is, I'd say, the perspective that we and our the people that I work with, that's what drives us, is this active caring. And as you'll see from some of the other following presentations, stewardship is active across sectors. It's in the private sector, it's in the government sector, it's in academia, it's sort of it's in many different, takes many different forms, and it also is infused into our homes and into our jobs and into our community spaces. And those are some things that I want us to keep in mind when we're thinking about strengthening stewardship. Is it's a multi-pronged thing. It's not just we need government funding to do this. It's it's involved in so many different areas. And just some examples to put some into context is, You know, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm using these for my own community, Chamber of Commerce here has an environmental category in their annual awards program. That's, you know, that's stewardship. The mechanic in our local dealership, they had set up a recycling program in the back of our, you know, in the Ford dealership. And, you know, that's stewardship. And some of the restaurants that we're starting to change out, you know, here, it's maybe not the same as it is maybe in the urban centers, but it's a little bit more difficult. Recycling is a little bit more difficult up here. But some of the restaurants that were sort of changing out their takeout containers before they were asked to or you know, sort of forced to. Again, that's something that I see as stewardship. The ranchers that we worked with, I mean, they've been active stewards for many years. And, you know, for one example, we were removing goldfish from Dragon Lake, and it, you know, an invasive species that was in the lake, and it was the dump didn't want us to bring the we're concerned about us bringing them to the dump, and we had a rancher, agricultural landowner who allowed us to bring into there. He mixed into the soil and to start sort of doing sort of soil augmentation with some invasive species. So, you know, again, that's stewardship in action. And, you know, neighbors who have recognized that, you know, there's some bird species that were nesting in this park just before there was some work being done, and actually talking with our municipality and saying, you can't do work here until after nesting season. So again, there's some more sort of stewardship from different perspectives. And well, so some of the challenges, as we all know, working in the environment is there's the climate action, landscape level impacts due to catastrophic events like wildfires, flooding, declining keystone species. The issues are numerous and they're compounded and they're more complicated than ever. And then if you look into the social landscape, we've got systemic issues that are impacting volunteers and or paid stewardship. I believe there's also stewardship that's paid stewardship. And there's you know, differences between rural and remote impacts that happen that stop people from getting involved in some of these things. There's demographic changes, access to qualified staff and volunteers. There's gaps in experience. There's our knowledge holders. I believe that our knowledge holders are getting overwhelmed. And this is what I get from our First Nations partners is everybody wants the elders involved. Everybody wants elders, you know, in information, and they want their stamp of approval. But, you know, there's in, you know, NASCO, there's like a handful of them, and they're being asked to be involved in so many different things. They're just overwhelmed with some of the work. Declining volunteer numbers, declining stewardship groups, as Wayne had mentioned earlier. Much of the work that we're doing is more difficult to engage with because it's complicated or requires equipment to do a lot of the watershed restoration that we're doing. So, you know, I kind of use this phrase when I you know, live in the area where the Plateau fire was in the wildfire in 2017. And at that time, our mayor sort of kept saying, you know, we've got unprecedented circumstances and it requires an unprecedented response. And I believe the same thing with stewardship. I think we're at a point in time where everybody does have to play a part in it, and everybody's part is extremely important in order to continue environmental stewardship. We're not meeting goals, we're not getting where we need to go. And the only way, and I'm not even sure if we're going to be able to do that, but the only way we're going to have a chance is if we're supporting stewardship in all of its forms across all of its sectors in order to do that. And we've come up with the groups that the people that I've talked to, we've come up with a number of ideas on what we can do to strengthen stewardship. But really what's needed is to strengthen active caring, is to facilitate space, resources, and opportunities to experience meaningful connections. I mean, if we can think about it in as a simplistic form as that, that's what it's going to take in order to really engage across sort of all of these sectors. I see increased government recognition and financial support as being key. Providing systems right now when we're doing a restoration work, I'm sure Wayne understands this as well, that anytime we're doing any kind of restoration work, we're lumped in. There isn't a stream for groups that do the work. We have to do the same permitting, have the same permitting requirements as companies. And so that's something that needs to happen. We could use communication support. We could have like an executive director for hire, flexibility of involvement. Some of my partners in the private sector are very interested in stewardship, but you know, they're not going to come to a meeting, but they'll allow me to talk to them on the phone while they're driving from one site to the other. I take down their notes and I bring that forward to the meeting on behalf of them. So I think we all have to just be more creative on how we're going to bring them involved. Having Tasha, Tasha's going to be working with me on this board on a one-to-one. She'll just participate and she'll get a chance to be a part of the operations here. And again, that's sort of a creative way that we're trying to bring in some young people into the work that we do. There's some great programs out there that they had. They used to have the environmental youth teams. They've had the conservation corps, the guardianship programs. Those are the kind of programs we all need to get behind and support and ask them to bring, you know, to have more of. Advocacy. I think there really isn't an advocate for stewardship. And this is why I've been involved in this board. That's why I've been involved in trying to develop this. We need to have somebody that's going to be advocating on behalf of all of us and all of our different sectors that are doing the work to people that can make some decisions to help to support us.
Hey.
I think I said it all in my time.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I love active caring. So with that, we're going to move on to Wayne.
Hi.
Take it away.
Thanks for the invite. Always nice to follow Tracy. She's so keen and enthusiastic and a great friend of all of us. So I live in Vanderhoof, British Columbia, the geographic center of the province of British Columbia. We probably are one of the most northern stewardship groups. I think we are working constantly on salmon recovery. Next slide. So we live on the Chaco River. The Chaco River had great salmon populations going back 5 or 6 decades. We have lost a lot. This maybe gives you some quick examples of climate change and loss of habitat. So you see in front of you the Kinney Dam, built in the 1949, 1950 active there. It reversed 60% of the Chaco River, turned it around, pushed it through a mountain and into the ocean. And you also see the massive effect of mountain pine beetle. Mountain pine beetle took out 80% of our forest. So you can quickly understand the hydraulic challenges that we have. We quickly followed that by logging, then we quickly followed that by wildfires. Period. So just to give you 3 massive implications for us. Next slide. We're blessed to have 32 different streams that flow through the Chaco Valley into the Chaco River. All of these streams at one time, we believe, supported Chinook coho fry, period. You can see on the center of the map there, the green area that denotes the agricultural belt, and on the outside, the Crown Land Forest. And so that gives us a really interesting challenge. We have 2 separate management objectives, one that protects the riparian zones on the Crown Land, the other one manages it to the high water mark. And of course, that is very problematic when you're trying to bring cooling temperatures to the system. We have developed an eDNA program that we're very, very pleased with. We have 3 years into it. In the last 2 years, we've been able to demonstrate 11 of the 15 streams that we did eDNA on through our schools and our university have Chinook fry in them. This presence absence really sets us up for success in understanding, first, that we have fish there, secondly, how far up the reaches in the system do we have them, allows us to kind of make our expenditures in an intelligent sort of a way. And one of the challenges in my world is neither the Crown nor private landowners have salmon as a priority. I feel strongly that we have lip service from both sectors here that this is a priority. It takes us forever to convince them that having salmon on their farm and ranch is actually a badge of honor. And when we do that, we are seeing the uptake in a much better way. Our next slide. So private land forms all sorts of challenges for funders when we are suggesting to a funder that we're prepared to invest $500,000 on a private piece of land when I could purchase the land for less than that value. It becomes problematic. Almost all of these, and you saw how the river navigates right through the center of the agricultural belt. Our first and most important challenge is those culverts that were badly installed and reinstalled and reinstalled and reinstalled. As climate change has come, I have seen graveyards of culverts that have been abandoned and end up with all sorts of messes. So we end up convincing the landowner that we'd like to pull these culverts out and we'd put a bridge in at our costs. A forest industry bridge that you're looking at right there is about $250,000 installed. We buy them at Ritchie Brothers for nominal fees, $20,000 to $50,000. We retrofit them, and almost all of our bridges are going in at about $100,000 or less. So a very large savings, but because it's on private land, we're in good shape. It just makes an affordable job for us. These are our pride points here. Our eD&A program has shown time and again fish at the bottom of the perched culvert. We open this up and right away we start to see the use of massive pieces of systems that were not available before. You can throw up the next one for us. Amongst all of the things that I show immense pride on here is our co-learning. So co is the carrier word for river stream. So we have a co-learning. So Nechako River and Dako River, give you a couple of examples. We've moved stewardship programs into our classroom. We had a realization that over 50% of the kids in School District 91, which goes from Burns Lake, Fraser Lake, Vanderhoof, Fort St. James, over 50% of those kids actually lived in the country, and that's where we're trying to get that message home, is to the country. So by starting kids off from kindergarten through to grade 11, we have active programs where data is collected, stored in a wonderful portal at the University of Northern British Columbia, and is allowing us to show our funders the value of where we're headed, proof positive that we're there. The next probably most important thing is to create off-channel watering opportunities. This is one of several installations that we have where it's an appropriate stream and gravity is on our side. We can develop something like this tire that you see. So this was a farm tractor tire. You can see the PCV pipe in the center. It brings the water in, and when it gets to the top of the second pipe, it flows it back into the system. So typically we borrow water for about 50 meters, bring it in, kick it out. That particular tire there can water up to 700 head. With that operation in success, then we fence off the riparian zone, and Bob's your uncle, we're back in business, getting a healthy system. This installation here is about $2,500, which is one of the cheapest restoration projects you'll ever get, and just such a big bang for your buck. It's homemade, it's farmer made, and it works, period. You don't allow yourself to make things too complicated. Farms and ranches actually love this concept of pulling a tire out of the garbage pile and putting it to work for them. Next slide. And that's the success that we're looking at. We call that billiard table grazing. I had a wonderful meeting with one of the senior owners on this property. It's a corporate farm, all family members owning it. I talked him into allowing us to do a demonstration site. He gave me approval. Christmas came, the family gathered, the approval was yanked because we're going to be a nuisance. We're going to be problematic. We met on New Year's Eve purposefully, and I re-talked myself into the project, and fast forward a decade. This is an example of the before after. In this particular site, in that after picture, I can find you netfuls of Chinook fry every time I go out there. It's just such a magic. I found this one was really interesting. The male members of the corporation said no. The wives and mother said, you guys are doing this. In fact, Grandma said, I'm upset at you. How could you do this to our farm? Which was really helpful in making that transition. And we use this as a demonstration site and try to prove that pride point. They can still graze in here. They just graze outside the riparian zone. And I have one of our funky tires set up on this site here. The riparian zone now is growing back in wonderfully and has been very successful for us. So that's sort of life in the Chaco Valley. That's one of millions of projects that we have done up here rather successfully. And thank you.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Wayne. Loved really hearing about the importance of private land and also that perseverance. Go back and talk to people. So with that, we'll turn it over to Phil. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, DG. We'll go to the next slide. I'm going to provide some perspectives on the private sector and just what stewardship means to us in the private sector. So, you know, I really love that idea that Tracy put forward about it being simply active caring, because that's really, I think, at the heart of what I'm hoping to talk about here today. You know, stewardship's an ethical value, so it's a lot like sustainability in many ways. It embodies, you know, responsible thinking and action towards the management of resources. So that's kind of how we apply it in the environmental space. But it can be applied in a whole range of other areas to things like economics and health and cultural resources. Private companies, publicly traded companies, industry, we all have an important role to play in contributing to and achieving things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm just going to say a few words about you know, WSP and the how stewardship and sustainability values are really fundamental and integrated into a whole range of our business activities. They're directly written into our code of conduct, for example. We have a whole series of commitments to ESG. We have professional standards of work that really rely on all of us as professionals caring about how we act and how we conduct our work. Our current business strategic plan has this written right in, and it also comes out in all of a lot of our client work and in our operations. So basically, WSP is a professional services firm, and our mission statement says WSP exists for the purpose of future-proofing our cities and the environment. So that's a pretty strong statement, but it's kind of a neat one. The idea is that we provide advisory, engineering, design services to clients in transportation, infrastructure, environment, building, power, energy, water, mining, resource sectors. We have about 65,000 professionals worldwide, all united by this common purpose. And that purpose is, you know, create positive and long-lasting impacts on the communities that we serve through innovation, integrity, inclusion, sustainability, and science really permeate our work throughout. CEO recently made a statement when he put out the 2022 to 24 strategy, you know, that focus on sustainability And by using the term sustainability, I'm really talking about, that active caring and stewardship that goes with it. Those are fundamental, and they're really the foundations of our success. They help us forge our reputation, build trust with colleagues, clients, and communities. So we pledged in that strategy from an environmental perspective to focus more on projects that are consistent with that vision and value, increase revenue, and by doing that, we want to increase our revenues that come from clean activities. And these are defined as those that have a positive net effect on the environment and directly support UN Sustainability Development Goals. So this means that certain sectors or industries, we're going to help our clients move toward net zero. We've got a number of fairly ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals of our own. And what the whole point of this that the CEO makes in the statement and the strategy statement is that that strategy is not only good stewardship, but it's also really good business. So I'm going to go to the next slide and start talking about a couple of projects that I've been working on and where I've found some of the greatest rewards in my own career have been ones that illustrate the value of stewardship, but also in working with communities to help them look after themselves. I've been working with a number of frontline communities in Alaska, which are, to some degree, facing the impacts of climate change first, kind of first and worst. And these are communities that have, historically been somewhat marginalized and disempowered by virtue of their location, but also the fact that they are, Native communities in Alaska, First Nations communities, and there's a huge abundance of these communities that face some really tough decisions coming up. The remote setting, the geologic context, means that they have limited availability of construction materials and resources with which to deal with some of the issues. And it's a northern community, so you've got a short seasonal window in which you can get things done. They also generally don't have access to boatloads of money, and this means that they need lots of help. But they're also really independent in the sense that they want to help themselves, and that's really good. This is Napakiak, which is on the Kuskokwim River, Lower Kuskokwim, about 400 people, 96% indigenous Yupik, and living a subsistence type lifestyle. In this place, you can see just from the photo here, it's vulnerable. They're on an island, Lower Kuskokwim River, no roads to the village. They rely on a runway and they rely on the river for their transportation supplies and subsistence. They've experienced pretty chronic erosion for the last half century, and they have a fairly obvious, what seems like a fairly obvious choice, but they need to plan, and they need to plan for how they're going to deal with this in terms of retreat. They're well into a retreat planning process, but they needed something of a smoking gun to help them obtain funding for this process. And that needed to be based on a lot of technical data and information that helped to support that decision. And I'm really pleased to say that just in the last couple of days in the New York Times, it was announced that Napakiak received $25 million to start the process of retreat for the most urgent parts, which you can see includes the school and some of their municipal infrastructure. So we'll pop to the next slide, and I'll just go through quickly. I'm not going to go through all the details here, but knowing what these frontline communities are going through, how do we provide support? So we've developed this solution that basically is a 4-part solution that is really focused on engagement. And I mean community engagement as well as other stakeholders that are involved. So it's really important to recognize that although these communities are faced with massive challenges, they really do want to help themselves. And that's really the best approach for them. So we actively engage the community in the process. So they take ownership of it at each stage as it moves through a number of technical studies and monitoring and data collection. Often the greatest resource, as I said, is they have traditional knowledge, which is really important to them and really important to coming up with solutions that are meaningful. They also have a really great can-do spirit, which is, again, helps them with this essence of active caring. And with that knowledge and attitude, they can accomplish a huge amount. So we'll go to the last example here, which is Shaktoolik. And this is a really interesting and exciting study. This community has already moved a couple of times in its history due to erosion and flooding. They're likely going to need to move again at some point in the future. One of the first things this community said to us when we were asked to help them with the study is, we don't need another study. You know, we've had lots of consultants come and study us and then go away, write a report, and those reports are just kind of collecting dust. So what's different? What's different about what you're going to offer us? And, you know, he's like, okay, that's a tough opener. We said, okay, well, you're going to make the difference here. We're going to incorporate your experience, your knowledge, your priorities. You're going to help us to understand the past. You're going to help us understand and shape the paths forward. We're in this together. And fortunately, they really like that. And fortunately, we've been able to implement that. So we started again with that risk assessment methodology I showed you previously, you know, and we worked through some quantitative work with them, you know, to try and help them quantify the threat and the cost of dealing with their challenges in flooding and erosion. And that helped them to show them that, yeah, they're certainly already vulnerable. And that's been brought home to them by a fairly significant storm that occurred at the end of September this year. In the short term, though, the community says, look, we really want to defend in place. A lot of these communities in Napakiak, Shaktoolik, they have a real reason for why they're located in these locations. And it comes, you know, back to their historic way of living. And that's really important to them. They don't want to move if they don't have to. So, but in this case, you know, at Shaktoolik, they've adopted almost by default a nature-based approach to protecting themselves. And they've taken into their own hands to construct a berm using sand excavated from their spit. And although they recognize that that provides protection from erosion and flooding, the structure frequently gets reshaped and requires a lot of reconstruction and a lot of ongoing work. So the community is saying, well, is that sustainable? And given what we have in terms of sand resources and maintenance requirements and equipment and also all that sort of stuff. And you know, at this stage, they know they can't afford to build a protection system that will last 30 to 50 years, but can we find some acceptable level of middle ground that will help them buy enough time to figure out how to move to the next stage? So again, we're helping them with the technical support for that. We're helping them find material sourcing. Are there sources of high quality material that they can go out and quarry themselves, bring back to site with reasonable costs and timeframes? And here we're working with one of their elders to look at one of those potential sites where they could potentially go and start a quarry. And ultimately, this work is helping, you know, them to understand the life cycle effectiveness of these different approaches that they can take for kind of preservation of their community. And working with this is also providing me with great lessons in the importance of stewardship. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Phil. Really, really fascinating. And let's just turn it straight to Clarissa.
Hi, thanks everybody. Sorry for the little temporary joiner, if anybody saw that. It's nap time where we are. First off, I just want to quickly take a minute to reintroduce myself. DG, you did a great job. But just in light of all the great conversations we've had so far, I actually am I'm really honored to be following these three amazing people who I'm speaking behind. So thanks to everybody so far. But the reason I wanted to just quickly reintroduce myself is because having worked both in a local government setting, kind of as an environmental planner, an environmental policymaker, and then more recently as a consultant supporting local governments through their kind of climate planning processes. I'm not here really to speak on behalf of either one of those perspectives more than the other. Really, what I just wanted to share with you is kind of some of the things that I've seen from both sides of that table, so to speak, and kind of some observations and some things that maybe I could share that might be helpful to some folks about the relationship between nature-based solutions and climate adaptation and stewardship. And so we've kind of heard some of these themes interwoven throughout so far. And so I think that that just really speaks to how important this topic is that even that people that aren't directly working in this exact space are still seeing the value there. And I think that that's really powerful. Morrison Hershfield is a pretty traditional engineering firm. And so just in line with that, the traditional approach to managing climate risk often involves built and gray infrastructure. But one of the things that we're seeing kind of come to the surface over and over again is how effective climate adaptation planning really requires that we explore ways to integrate the built and the human and the natural approaches and these different environments and ecosystems, so to speak. And so I just want to share a little bit about what I've seen in that regard and the synergies that exist. Oh, we can stay for a minute, Anna, because I just want to share a little bit of a story about the picture that's on the screen. It's not intended to be self-indulgent. There's a reason. I just wanted to share some stories about the synergies that I've seen in this work and in the work of SCBC. So the picture that you see here on the screen was one of me during the one of the programs that I launched while I was working at the city of Port Coquitlam, entitled Greener City. So this program was focused on engaging the community and restoring some degraded and underutilized urban park spaces by removing some significant amounts of invasive species and replanting native and climate adaptive species in their space to help restore biodiversity and provide some critical urban habitats, as well as contributing to the city's climate goals. And I think that the way that program came about was particularly interesting, because I started noticing over time people kind of coming to the city wanting to get outside and to volunteer in the environment in some way, shape, or form, whether it's kind of walking through the river basin and picking up trash, or helping to remove invasive species, pulling up ivy, pulling down blackberry. Lots of people wanted to participate in those types of stewardship activities, but we're getting turned away by volunteer services because they didn't have, like, volunteer services didn't have enough capacity to take them on and to do that work. And so me being the person that I am, and said, well, I can do that. I can manage that program. And they said, well, Claire, you don't have any money. We didn't allocate any budget for that. Don't worry about that. We'll get it figured out. Just trust me enough to start a pilot and we'll see what happens. And they said, okay. And so Greener City was born. And just by a complete stroke of unfortunate luck, our very first event ended up being in the November 2021 atmospheric river. And so that's where this picture was from, was us tearing out. We actually had one of our streets guys go in with a bulldozer first and tear it all down, so that all we had to do was focus on the roots, because I don't know if you've ever tried to pull out Himalayan blackberry, but that bramble was about 3,000 square feet and about 15 feet tall before we tore it down. And so I had 65 brave citizens of Port Coquitlam join me that day in an atmospheric river, and a subsequent 100 more the following spring on Earth Day to clean up that particular space. And so to go from zero to that was pretty powerful, especially for a community like Port Coquitlam, which traditionally hasn't had a particularly strong environmental approach. And so it was really empowering to see that happen. Okay, we can go next now, Anna, thank you. So most of you are probably already familiar with one or both of these diagrams. Maybe on the left, you've seen something pretty similar. It's a pretty common framing of a robust climate response. So on one hand, we have kind of our climate mitigation actions, where we're reducing our own inputs to climate change and kind of reducing our impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And on the other, we have adaptation, where we're responding to the impacts that we're already seeing or we expect to see in the future as a result of changing climate. And so, as you've kind of heard interwoven throughout all of these presentations, increasingly we're seeing actions that can achieve emissions reductions while simultaneously helping communities to adapt to climate change. And that tends to be a preferred approach, and for good reason. And so you'll probably commonly hear that start to be referred as low carbon resilience. And those are the things that are really kind of happening in the center of that Venn diagram. And so coordinating and co-evaluating these adaptation and mitigation pieces in policy and planning helps us to prevent contradiction and maladaptation, and can help lead to co-benefit opportunities that help to transition communities towards this low carbon future. And that's a really powerful and really important thing. But we do have to be careful because mitigation and adaptation planning approaches that have typically been done separately, and as I said, can kind of lead to some contradictions that can be maladaptive. So you can see that on the lower right quadrant of the right-hand diagram, or in some cases can be important from a human perspective, but extremely emissions intensive on the upper left. And so in my opinion, what these diagrams don't really capture entirely is this interconnectedness of nature and natural systems, and the role that those systems play in a robust and effective climate response. For example, natural assets can help us to reduce the need of emissions intensive processes like stormwater pumping and filtration as like a really common example when we talk about wetlands. These assets tend to be more adaptive to changing climate conditions than typical kind of more traditional gray infrastructure solutions in the longer term when they're managed appropriately and when they're funded adequately. And they also tend to have lower embodied emissions. And as we've kind of heard, when done through grassroots organizations, can often be cheaper to install. Thanks, Wayne, for a nice setup for that one. And also have the tendency to increase in value over time, often unlike built assets, which tend to depreciate. Next slide, please, Anna. So here's just a quick snapshot of some co-benefits. Accounting for the value of these natural assets and their role in climate adaptation in terms of both value provided and value of losses avoided is becoming more critical. And I think we're starting to see that in things like kind of like the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative is a really important one. That's where this diagram came from. Natural assets can help provide invisible services to communities that to date have been largely valued at zero in a lot of ways, and therefore have been lost to development. And so unless communities and asset managers can start to document, measure, and value these services, we're going to continue to run that risk of underestimating and depleting the value of the really important ecosystems that ultimately sustain us. And so I think one of the most powerful lessons that I can really convey is this idea that identifying and articulating these co-benefits can help our communities to identify and to communicate the advantages of the natural asset management approach, in addition to the potential to reduce emissions and increase climate resilience. It might help us to tip the scales towards the use of a more nature-based approach instead of or in tandem with engineered and gray infrastructure that can't always achieve similar results in areas like improving community livability, in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of energy efficiency, water quality. These are all things that we can really, that natural assets and natural systems, if we can think about how to build them up and recognize their not only their value to people, but their implicit value and the value that they have in and of themselves, is a pretty strong approach when we're thinking about climate adaptation. So I will go to the next slide and you see a really cool map. I really like this one. I'm reminded here of the old adage that you probably have heard before, that you can't manage what you don't measure. And that's really true for natural assets, as you can probably expect. So since 2016, local governments across Canada have been undertaking asset management based approach to recognize natural assets as infrastructure to be protected and managed over the long term. And so this includes things like conducting inventories, modeling, valuing, and so on. And the rate of this is increasing. And so you can kind of see some examples on the screen of where these activities are happening. So a big part of my current role has really been focused on capacity building. So in my current role at MH, I work with a number of really talented subject matter experts in a variety of engineering disciplines. I'm not an engineer, so I'm a bit of a black sheep in that regard. I'm a planner surrounded by engineers, which is always a lot of fun. But it means that this approach is new to a lot of them, and that's not a bad thing, that's just reality. But under our new climate change community practice at MH, I recently hosted a session intended to start to help some of these folks consider how they might be able to better integrate a nature-based approach into their work and advocate for the same in their client relationships to help to respond to this growing interest in Canadian communities to account for natural assets as a part of an effective climate response. And so for some, this can be a really big change from their status quo, which arguably, in my opinion, can make some of these conversations that much more important. In a lot of ways, even having that conversation can be a huge step forward. And DG, my time is up, so I will stop there. Maybe we can just flip to the summary slide so you can see my last couple sentences, and I will pass the mic back over. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Clarissa and Phil and Wayne and Tracy. Really, really great. I am aware that we are over time. Maybe Anna, you could just stop sharing there. And I think we probably, if people are okay with it, we will have time for one question. And I would like to I'll just ask people, our presenters, to have answer this one question. You know, given your work, what are you most looking forward to going forward in terms of your work? If you could just have a quick moment of, you know, given what your work is, what are you most looking forward to? Maybe having something to do with igniting the mainstreaming process for stewardship, or integrating climate adaptation, mitigation. What is it that you're most looking forward to? Does Tracy, I see you smiling. Do you have a quick answer on that one?
Yeah, quick answer is looking forward to the richness, the collaboration. Everybody seems to be more interested in collaboration. And on the collaborations, the richness and the subtleties and the it makes projects much more exciting and meaningful to be a part of. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Great, thank you, Tracy. Wayne?
For me, I think because this is all about watershed recovery, salmon recovery is the principled idea. I want the province to make salmon recovery a mandated issue. Right now we have lip service. I love the past premier, but he didn't get us there. He just opened his mouth and said the right words, but he didn't get us there. So that would be mine.
Perfect, thanks, Wayne. Phil?
Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, I'm pretty excited about this opportunity with, you know, the growth and interest and pickup of nature-based solutions, which I think are really tied in with the whole climate change challenge. You know, I think climate change has really heightened our awareness of you know, the impact and the need to really you know, look for tangible solutions that can be implemented locally and with local resources. I think the other thing that I'm excited about is that there is this kind of growing desire, I think, in the private sector in particular. A lot of this stuff happens in the public and the NGO space, but I'm seeing indications that there is more of a tangible desire in industry to really get involved in this and make a better world. And you know, that's why I provided the examples from kind of this WSP corporate perspective, which, you know, is pretty interesting to see. And I think that we got to keep the lines of communication open, and because I think the private sector does provide a great source of opportunity and funding for entities like SCBC.
Great, thank you, Phil. And Clarissa?
Yeah, thanks, DG. I think looking forward to the next year of SCBC in particular, I'm really excited to see the expansion of the Green Shores program and all the great work that's going on in that regard, especially as it starts to mainstream, not only in BC, but in the Maritimes. That's so huge and so awesome. And just thinking to all the things that I was talking about the importance of our natural systems and our ecosystems from a climate adaptation approach, that is huge. And I'm really excited about that.
With it, thank you. Morgan, I see you've got your hand raised there, but I'm going to ask you just to hold off. And I would ask Anna just to put that slide for a thank you to our funders and partners. I know that Christine did a great job talking about our in-kind partners, but just want to give a special shout out to our funders, including the Real Estate Foundation, the Province of BC, Pacific Salmon Foundation, Environment and Climate Change Canada, as well as Natural Resources Canada. And you can see the list of in-kind partners there. It's absolutely tremendous. And so big shout out to thank you for our funders and partners. And I will turn it back over to Phil to wrap up.
Okay, thanks, DG. I think all I'm going to do at this point is to thank everyone for attending and for your participation in today's meeting, and thank the presenters and panel once again, but also a big thank you to the board. And I guess I'm saying so long, but not farewell at this stage.
Not farewell, yeah. That's great. And I'll just jump in. If anybody, if you have time to be here for another few minutes of pressing question, we could, if any of the presenters can hang out for another 5 minutes, then we can maybe get to some of those other questions. So thank you. And we can go back to, yeah, there we go.